Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I have one quick administrative announcement before we hand it over to our speakers to kick off the session. This session has been pre-qualified to support continuing education requirements for several cybersecurity certifications. If you're a member seeking attendance documentation, please be sure to scan your badge at the scanner located in the back of the seating area at the conclusion of this session. Scanner shut off 15 minutes post-session, so please get your badge scanned before networking with the speakers. Also note that to qualify for CEUs or CPEs, the session must run a full 60 minutes. That 60 minutes can include Q&A, so please have questions ready for the speakers to fill the time requirements. Full details on the continuing education program are available in the TechNet Cyber app and conference website. Thank you, and now over to our speakers.
I gotta freaking sit next to you too?
If he put this next to me, I'll be messing with the keyboard. That's the worst thing they can do.
It's good, I know my own name now. Steve, is it okay if we share a mic?
Oh yeah, that's fine.
All right. All right, good morning, everyone. I see a few folks trickling in. I want to thank you all for joining us today. We are here to discuss a topic critical for technology professionals across both the public and private sectors: navigating exponential change, transforming technology organizations for the future. So I'm Mike Stefanelli. I am a partner with McKinsey, where I lead much of our technology strategy and acquisition work across the defense sector. I also help lead our firm's research across all sectors on strategies to acquire next-generation technologies. Think AI, data, analytics, etc. I'm here representing McKinsey. We are a firm that in the last 5 years has supported over 500 large digital transformations across the public and private sectors. This includes 70% of the Fortune 50 and numerous other public sector organizations. All right, break. Enough about me. Let's talk a little bit about today's panel. We're really excited by today's topic and to be joined by four esteemed panelists here, who I'll introduce in just a second. So we find ourselves in a world of rapid technological innovation, where we see organizations that are grappling with a dual challenge. One is staying ahead of adversarial threats and disruptive innovations like AI, while also navigating macro uncertainties. Whether you're in government or industry, the stakes are high, and this means delivering capabilities to warfighters faster at the right cost to taxpayers. For industry, it means staying competitive, agile, and resilient in a rapidly shifting landscape. So let me introduce our panelists that are joining us today. We have Chief Warrant Officer 5 Taylor Wells. Chief Wells is the Senior Technical Advisor to DISA's Director. In this role, he advises the Director on all matters relating to planning, developing, delivering, operating, and defending the global enterprise network infrastructure and services. He brings nearly 30 years of operational and technical experience to the role. Seated to his right is Mr. Stephen Wallace. Mr. Wallace is DISA's Chief Technology Officer. He also serves as the Emerging Technology Directorate Director. In these roles, he focuses on delivering innovative processes, services, and capabilities across the agency in areas that include zero trust, 5G, quantum-resistant cryptography, and DoD IT standards. To his right is Mr. Mark Roman. Mr. Roman is the Executive Director of Cyber Technologies for Mantech. He brings 22 years of experience in technology development, consulting, and business growth strategy, from 5 years in industry and about 16 years in the government prior. And then lastly, we have Mr. William LaPlante. Mr. LaPlante was the former Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, where he was responsible for all matters pertaining to acquisition, contract administration, logistics and material readiness, installations and environment, operational energy, nuclear, chemical and biological defense, the acquisition workforce, and the defense industrial base. That's it. He brings 4 decades of experience in the defense and national security field across government, research and development with FFRDCs, and industry. All right. So I think this morning we're hoping to cover a few different things in our questions with our panelists today. We want to talk a little bit about how can we accelerate productivity to deliver technology solutions faster? How can we transform legacy operations using digital native skills, tools, and approaches? How can we adopt technologically native operating models to drive efficiency and innovation? And then get a bit of a deeper understanding on how do you assess costs and risks to improve decision making. All right, enough preamble. Let's jump in. All right, so the first question I'm going to direct it to you, Mr. Wells, is about speed. Given the rapid pace of technological advancements, adversary innovations, and the need to deliver capabilities swiftly, what strategies have you found most effective in accelerating productivity and achieving faster impact?
So over time, what I would look at and what I've seen in the past is that if individuals do the simple things to deliver their day-to-day job, do the simple things. It's not that technology can speed things up. It's individuals doing what they're asked and required to do. What I've seen across the government, both from an integrator perspective and a government and individuals in uniform, is that some work, some don't work. And we all know those individuals that don't work, and those that are working are running at 150 miles an hour. So if we hold those accountable that are supposed to be doing their day-to-day job, you'll be able to deliver faster, because you'll have more of the workforce actually working together and not against each other. So that's how I see delivering faster, is actually holding individuals responsible for what they are getting paid to do their job.
Yep. Okay. Does anyone else want to add onto that?
Yes, sure. I can jump on that too. And I think one of the places where Taylor and I work well together is ferreting out the talent, not necessarily following the org chart or structure or anything like that, but it's ferreting out the talent, empowering the right people, even folks that aren't necessarily, whether educationally or whatever, like they don't have that particular thing in their background, empowering the right person to do the right job with the right attitude is probably the biggest tool in our toolkit. The rest of the stuff will fall into place. So that's one of the things I've seen work best. We have found some talent deep in the agency that may not have been exposed otherwise. Maybe they would have. I don't know, but I think it's one of the things that it's probably one of the most common conversations between Taylor and I is, hey, this person, this is what they're doing. Hey, can we drag them into this? Can we, bring them into whatever? And I think that's an area where we've seen some of our greatest success.
If that's okay with you for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things that I think about when you're trying to embrace that pace of change. The first is some old and new, right? Agile, DevSecOps, and truly embracing those approaches, right? Truly embracing. But the second, I think most important, comes from an experience that I had when I was with government. And it was a formidable experience where I was briefing some work that I had spent probably close to 2 years on. And During that experience, in a briefing room with some senior leadership, I was asked the question at the end of my presentation on the research, so what? And as a classically trained engineer, I was somewhat deflated by that experience. I was like, hey, wait a second. I spent all this time explaining this work. Maybe I didn't do a good enough job. And some truth to that was the so what. So as I think about how we accelerate the pace of change and develop technologies, always focus on the so what, the macro, zoom out. Where is your technology being used? How is it being deployed? All of those kinds of concepts need to be considered. And then I think lastly, coming from industry, don't forget that there are partners to help you along the way in various areas, right? If you had to go build a house today, you wouldn't go start by cutting down a tree. You'd use pre-built, quarter sawn lumber and work through that challenge with the trades and folks that know how to do those experiences best. So leverage the partners, like those in this room, to really deploy technology at scale.
Hi. So just to add to my colleagues here, a couple things. Yes, there's no substitute for having the best workforce at the tip of the spear. And if you can have the greatest plan in the world with not the right workforce, it won't work. But with a great workforce, you also need a few other things. You need a clear understanding of what problem you're trying to solve. And sometimes to go fast, you have to start slow. So I've in my last job had to come in and clean up a lot of things that were started very fast with promises of technology. Whereas if they only would have spent another month or two to kind of lay down, what are we trying to build? What are the basic requirements? Who's the user? Who's the functional owner of this? Is there a product manager? And make sure everybody understands their role, because that extra month at the very beginning will save you a lot of headaches later.
Yeah, no, I love those comments. And I think, as I think about moving with speed, right, we heard comments around getting your top performers, making sure your problem is defined well. I think, upon reflection, it's also important that folks are aligned on the same common North Star of where they're headed. How do you make sure through your own teams and also with, as you think about your industry partners and whatnot, you kind of bring folks in the tent and kind of share what the actual warfighters' requirements are, so they can shape and prioritize their efforts appropriately. I'll tee that up for maybe Mark. Do you want to start? I would love to hear the industry perspective on sometimes being an arm's length away from the actual requirements originators.
Yeah, I hate to reiterate my previous comments, but it's a so what scenario. What are we trying to achieve? How are we driving? What is the strategy? And derivation thereof is just so critical, right? I don't have a lot of comments beyond that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I would say, and kind of to Bill's comment about understanding the problem and maybe taking the time, we as technologists have a really bad habit. I'll use the classically trained engineer comment. We as technical folks have a really bad habit of rushing into a technical solution without understanding the problem and just wanting to deploy cool tech and trying to get after it. But I think taking that moment to step back and also bluntly, like, we wrestle with it all the time, the balance between formal requirement sets and execution. So there is a balance there to be struck. Too heavy of a requirements process means you will likely miss the mark and be way too down in the weeds and not see the forest for the trees. But then the flip side, not enough, doesn't give you enough in the way of guardrails and allow you to actually hit your mark. So I think some of it also comes down to, just as unsexy as it sounds, conversation. Like just having a damn conversation about something and hearing the other side and trying to figure out where you can meet them in the middle, whether you're bringing a solution to the table or whether you're describing your problem, I think is the communication angle. Can't be understated or overstated.
Define the problem, develop the problem statement, modify the problem statement, everybody agrees on the problem statement before we get to the tech to solve a problem. Steve and I will go back and forth to go solve something very fast and, hey, let's pump the brakes. What are we trying to solve for? do we agree this is what we're trying to solve for? Because if we don't have agreement and we're trying to solve for this, then we can't get the workforce to get behind us, right? And then have the workforce at all levels, hey, I've come up, not I as an individual, but we came up with the solution, or this is our idea to solve the problem. As soon as you have buy-in, at that point in time, you can't stop, you won't be able to stop the momentum once you have the buy-in. So
I'll add one other element, I think. Sometimes we modify the problem statement, we develop the thing, we modify the problem statement again. Sometimes it's important to embrace something like kill criteria. For example, if you're spending a lot of time and resources on something that is no longer viable, there's this sunken cost fallacy where you think you continue to invest in it and it will somehow be better. I think embracing kill criteria has been very helpful to say, hey, this no longer serves us. It's time to terminate the project, time to terminate the technology, whatever it is. Put it on the shelf, put it in cold storage for some later time, whatever the scenario might be. Embracing that has been very successful in not so much failing fast, but re-diverting.
Yeah, just to add a few comments. One, and you can have different terminology for this, or taxonomy, whether you're in commercial or industry or government. But there's kind of three legs of the stool to develop something. You need to have the requirements, as we just talked about, kind of sorted out, or at least in an agile sense. You got to have an X strategy. X strategy is really what that means is you have to have what is the contract type, who's the industry partners, what are the incentive systems, what's the roles of the functional? The functional usually has to drive things, but the functional is not the one that decides what version of Oracle to use. The functional is the one saying, I need to do this function. And then the third piece, don't forget, is the money folks. And all three of those legs have to work, and when things work really well, they're working very agile together. They're trading all the time. And you don't just set the requirements and forget about it for 10 years. You actually do learn, as we just talked about. That's a level of sophistication that we need more. If you look at, in the DoD, there was a new software acquisition pathway. It's not new anymore. That was put in 2018, 2019 with sort of colorless money. That was exactly the point of that pathway, was that the idea that you would have R&D and then procurement and then sustain with three different colors of money does not apply to modern technology. And by the way, don't just think of it as the software. It is also the hardware that's associated with the software.
Yeah, that was all great points. All right, so let's assume that the elements of that stool are in place, right, and folks are getting after a problem. How do you think about empowering those folks with the right tools, the right skills to be most effective in cracking down that problem?
I feel you both looking at me.
This is how you get pressured.
So I think it goes back to some of the first comments that I made around finding that right talent and then empowering them, making sure that above all else, they know to speak truth to power, not to hide things. Bad news doesn't get better with time. All that good kind of stuff. But it is a challenge, and then making sure that they don't get yanked in 19 different directions and never actually deliver anything. I think that's I'm big on empowerment. I'm trying to think through you go ahead and jump in, Mark, and then let me.
I think I would summarize what you were trying to say is identifying and embracing the early adopters, and those are technology natives, as quickly as possible. They will, I guarantee, present themselves to you in various ways. It may be awkward, it may be powerful, it may be even condescending, but sometimes when those technology adopters, present themselves, they have genuinely good ideas, and they come from almost a questioner's style of philosophy where they're questioning the status quo, questioning if we can use new technology to solve a problem. Just embrace and empower those people, give them the latitude in an organization to really develop and use that technology. And there are plenty of technologies as well where you might not have those technology natives, like low-code, no-code platforms, to cross the technology moat or intellectual moat for folks that aren't ready to adopt the new technology space. So I think it's a people and cultural challenge first, honestly.
I would just add to that another tool that I think we all know, but it's funny, even though we know it, we still don't do it enough, is you bring in the right way, at the right cadence, the operational perspective. I was, in one of my past lives, trying to help on electronic health records. And for the first version of it, I think that rolled out to the Pacific Northwest, it didn't get very good reviews, right? I was actually a senior VP at MITRE at the time, and our CTO, who's still the CTO at MITRE, happens to be a medical doctor. And I said, fly out to Seattle and sit down with the doctors and talk to them about what the hell's going on with this medical records thing. And he really got into their heads as a doctor and said, this is what they like, this is what they don't like, and here's why. And there was something that the techies in the world won't understand. I saw the same thing in Ukraine. Many companies pushing things to Ukrainians come back and tell everybody how great it's working. It's like, well, have you asked the Ukrainians how it's working? Have you actually looked at the data? No, they hadn't. And so if you bring that reality back, and sometimes it's pretty sobering because you hear stuff you don't want to hear, but you get that real world user feedback. And then in a perfect world, it really works very nicely and it closes.
But it also has a lot to do with getting folks who are empowered, frankly, to open up their aperture, right? To not look at, like, well, this is my area, so it must be doing fine, and everything's rosy. The reality is that, and I'll use your health records example there, like, the end users see poor performance out of the system. They don't care whether it's the network, the servers, the application, what have you. They just know it's not working well, so instantly, it's down. So getting folks to open their aperture, own the problem end to end, that's, in my opinion, quite empowering as well, to have that this might be your area of specialty, but understand that you may not have to master the whole thing, but you need to understand the whole thing.
Yeah, and from the operational stance, so growing up where I have, from a military perspective, 20 plus years in SOF, so operationally, so I was the operator on the ground, going out on target at night, with the actual guys going through the door. So if it didn't work for me as a communicator, then I don't need to make those decisions to build that for the next gen radio or the tracks flip down on my chest. The technicians think, hey, it's great to have that, but for the operators, hey, I want my eyes downrange. I don't want them looking at the little screen right here. They need to be looking downrange. So figure out, hey, what's the balance between that? Because I don't need another 2.3 pounds on my back. That's not what I need. I need 6 ounces of battery on my back. So until you get the operators, like what Bill's talking about, into the mix early in the decision cycle and prototyping and everything else, you will miss the mark 9 out of 10 times every day. And empowering the technicians to make decisions, whether they're right, wrong, or indifferent. Yeah. As you're developing, I'll always say this, and I live by it, the developer that's developing before it's actually being put, they're not going to kill anyone. So unless you're actually pulling the trigger or pressing the button to drop the bomb, it's okay to fail fast and early. We have failed 1,000 times, but I don't have to be successful once. So once I'm successful, I'm good.
The one thing also that's very sobering is when people like these wonderful warfighters, like my colleague here, are in the fight. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. They'll turn it off, or in the Ukrainians' case, they'll throw it in a river. So you can love the thing you sent over there, and it's sitting at the bottom of a river somewhere, because it didn't work in the dust storm, it was easily jammed or something. So they're ruthless, which they should be, and that's why. But it's hard. You have to be able to listen.
Yeah, and so funny story. So 2007 timeframe, we'd had a vendor come down to Fort Benning at the time and say, hey, mobile phone in the case, indestructible, no problem. Young Ranger, here, took it, reared back, threw it against the concrete wall, and it broke. He's like, you said it, why'd you do that? He said, you said it was indestructible. No, it's not. Well, that wouldn't happen. Yes, it would. You've never been on target with us and understand what's going to happen on target. So when we build things and you make statements of indestructible or can't do this, make sure you know what your target audience is.
I think there's a boat at the bottom of the Atlantic that they claim the same thing about.
No, that's great. I think just putting a fine point on that, we've done a bit of research on when you actually have folks empowered with the right skills, right? You have folks doing that constant feedback loop. The delta between productivity and rate of capability deliver is about 3 to 5 times faster when you compare your kind of top performers versus your middle to bottom tier performers. So I think the research across over 1,000 organizations over the last 5 years really proved this out on that speed and the quantitative impact. I would love to actually dive deeper a little bit into specifically within this question, data and analytics. I know this has been a priority area for DISA's leadership, being able to best harness data for actionable next steps. When you think about developing the right things, moving out on capability, executing on your operations, what is your approach? How do you think about best harnessing tools and training folks to appropriately leverage data and analytics?
So I'll jump on this one first because I know Steve's itching to get on this one. So from a DISA standpoint, it's not that we have a lack of data. We've got more data than we know what to do with. What we don't have is the right questions to ask of the data for what you're trying to answer.
That's the issue.
We are very fast to say, hey, we need this tool to go do this. Yeah, but what question are you trying to answer? Just write down that very simple question, because you'll be surprised that it's actually not very deep in the data to answer that question. Go ahead.
You said a lot of what I was probably going to throw in
That's
there,
why
but
I said it first.
it has been a focus for some time. I will tell you that over the last 6 months, 7 months now, we had a gentleman, a certain 3-star, join our agency who might just happen to have a data science background, and he's pressing hard on what are we doing, how are we doing it, what are the flows, what are the questions that are being asked. He's driving the agency hard on that, which is good. To Taylor's point, we are really good at generating data. And there's striking that balance between the analyst who says that they want every bit of data generated since the beginning of time and they want access to it for eternity, and then the realities of budgets and how much we can hold on to and how much we can keep hot and accessible. So that's part of the equation. But it is a lot about like what question do you actually want to ask, and so several of the points that have been made up here already, whether we're talking about the operators in the field or the folks that are sitting at our DISA Global site in St. Louis, what do they need? Having the conversations about what questions they need to ask. And then, okay, now how do we go get the appropriate data sets and give them access to it and allow them to ask those questions are huge in the delivery of that capability. There's also, there's that side around defense, but there's also the analytics around just even straight up operations and how we're leveraging that. I can tell you in the past, the agency's mentality was, and this was several years ago, but the agency's mentality was, well, this is our cyber data and this is our ops data and never the two shall meet. And it has taken a cultural push in order to get everybody into the same place within the last few years of, hey, this is data, and how do we want to leverage the big pot of it versus attempting to segregate it by role or that sort of thing. So I again, probably above all else, it goes back to, what questions are we looking to ask, and then how do we best get, those answers.
Yeah, I think that I was really pleased to hear my colleagues say that about the questions being asked. I have a couple points I'd make on data. Everybody is for data. There's no anti-data people. They won't admit it, of course. Everybody wants to be empirical. It's the right thing to do. And one thing, on a positive way, one thing that really you can see it happen in a culture is when data starts to be shared and starts to be agreed upon, then people will attack the problem. So like in the case of, I'll give it a specific example, warfighter readiness of air platforms, submarine ships, whatever. Getting the services to agree on what their data was, then getting that into the system and getting it to be reviewed at the Department of Defense level, the SecDev level, sounds like it should be pretty easy. It was not, but we got there. And what was really nice was that there was an argument. Usually the classic data thing is, well, my data says this, well, your data's wrong, and then you never get out of that. You got to get past that. So I think that's really important. But the second thing, which gets back to what these guys are saying, is you need to know what question you're trying to answer. I was the acquisition executive for the DoD the last three years, and I wanted the basics. What does the data say on cost plus versus fixed price contracts? What is the length of time between a development milestone versus a production milestone? What is this? What is that? And I found that actually the department had lost ground on a lot of that. Part of that was just the reorgs, the AT&L, if you know what that was, a split. So I pulled in some of the former folks that had set this all up, the data cells for Ash Carter, when Ash Carter was in my job and then later as a deputy secretary. And what they said was really fascinating. They said he wanted, almost like in a professor sense, wanted to have a small cadre of people that if he had a question that he wanted an answer for, he only had an hour, they would give him an hour's worth of quality answer. If they had 3 days, I'd give them 3 days. But what's really key is they had people that could think about the question and then understand what is the right data to look at to get the question answered. I feel sometimes if you focus too much on the data, you actually lose the forest for the trees.
Yeah, it's
So
context.
It's really the context. And so if you're saying I'm going to do data, say for what? I'm going to understand my costs. Okay, great. Then you're going to have people who are cost experts and finance people that are going to ask questions. What does the data say about this? Or I'm going to look at my acquisition success. Well, I have acquisition experts ask the questions. So that's something I would add.
Yeah, I'll just foot stomp the data for what scenario, because everything old is new again, and we're seeing it again with AI. Everybody wants AI. It wouldn't be 2025 without AI.
I was
right?
going to say, we made
right?
it 30
I
minutes.
know, right?
30 minutes.
I thought it's called A1.
Yeah, but for what, right? What is the purpose? Do you need a chatbot? Do you need to do some signals intelligence work? Do you need some reductionist data? Like, what is the approach that you need for whatever process you need? And don't forget about the properties of data. Like, if you're collecting it, hopefully it's somewhat resistant to decay for the need that you have. If you're answering a particular question, you want to be able to use that data for some set period of time. There's lots of properties that are lost in this when we only focus on the collection and storage element. So that's all.
Yeah, I think especially as you reflect around how important that data is going to be and how you execute your operations, quickly react in the loop without answering the right questions right. Are you informing the wrong things in an environment where it could be challenging to test in something that's a real life scenario? Okay, great. So I think related to the skill sets, tools, data, I think there's a macro point here around how do you best organize your teams to answer these questions, to provide the right capabilities to the warfighters. In a lot of the organizations we work with, a common trademark that we often see of organizations here that do this well is disaggregating a little bit of what are the specific products, the use cases that are needed, organizing teams around that, and then also organizing folks around what are the common platforms or shared capabilities, and kind of using this as a way to ratchet up the speed that these different teams move to develop capability fastest. Would love to hear maybe any examples or how you all think about it in your spaces on how do you organize your teams to move most effectively at pace against technology and adversary threats.
So I run a team of about 25 individuals from all walks of life that I hire very specifically in ADISA, National Guard and Reserve individuals. I bring them on active duty, right? So when I bring them on, I don't necessarily look for what their MOS is or ASFC, what they do in their day-to-day in-uniform life. Some are VPs of companies, and they just want to come back on and serve. But they have a passion for doing cyber, even though they're in uniform, they're a medical tech. So I'll bring them on as a medical tech in DISA, but I use them for their passion. So what I've figured out with my teams and really across the agency is how to harness the individual's passion, because I exploit their passion. So when I exploit their passion, then they just do things because they like to do it. It's not because it's a job. It's because, hey, they do it in the basement at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm a work hard, play hard kind of individual. If nothing's going on, hey, take the time off. But when I call it at 2 o'clock on Sunday morning, hey, it's time to work, guys. And so from my leadership style, I am very open and give a lot of latitude to the team. So it's not like a draconian aspect of it. I let them form their own little teams, and they pull from each other across our 25-person team, and which then spans out into the rest of the agency across other, that's not necessarily on my individual dedicated team, but then they pull in off of Steve's team, and or I'll cut them to Steve's teams to get after other hard problem sets. So from my standpoint, it's more empowering the individuals to make their own decisions. I don't control their calendars; they control all their own calendars. Mm-hmm. So when you let individuals flourish like that, you'll see them. You'll see the ones that run, and then you'll see the ones that follow. So,
yeah, I like that. It's about letting them work in an agile way, offering flexibility to organize themselves how they see is most appropriate.
Yeah. So to expound upon that, to Taylor's point, it is about that empowerment. My team in particular, we just because of the way the government is built, we have to have divisions, that sort of thing. But it doesn't mean that these particular things live in these divisions. We'll pull talent from wherever the talent actually lives. So there is that element of harnessing. And to go back to some comments earlier, not this is what your your grade series is or whatever. A good idea is a good idea. I don't care whether it came from, and of course there's legalities and this sort of thing. But I was a contractor before I came to DISA, and the thing that was instilled in me is a one team, one fight mentality. Obviously, there are legal limitations to that. Nobody looks good in stripes. But trying to figure out and strike that best balance. A good idea is a good idea no matter the rank or the color of the badge. And so trying to bring those folks, and even from across the agency, I try to talk to folks about what do they like doing in their free time, what are their interests, what's their background, because they may be doing something right now that's completely out with where their passions are. So to Taylor's point about, and his quote about harnessing their passion, it's figuring out where their passions are, and okay, cool, let's go play with this. Like we've got this problem, you're the right person, let's go pull them in and empower them as no matter where they sit, from across the entire agency. And that's always been, at least in my experience, sort of the senior leadership mentality within DISA is just harness the folks. Let's have conversations. Let's move. It's one of the things that I think we do fairly well. There's probably places we could do better, but it goes back to that ferreting out the talent and then leveraging or harnessing it to benefit.
So I have a phrase I like to use when building teams, and it's that there are no superheroes in engineering. And that's not to say there aren't fantastic people who can do fantastic things. But what we find in 2025 is that most problems are spanning disciplines, spanning organizations, spanning communication styles, all of these kinds of things. And you really, truly need to leverage the team to work together. There is no one person that can do it all. So when building those teams, I'm really thinking about how to construct the team, who's the communicator, focusing on durable skills like creative thinking, things like that, is really where my focus and effort is when constructing a team to solve problems.
Yeah, there's I don't know if the term is used anymore, it's probably old-fashioned at this point, but what's been described here in the past would have been called cross-functional teams. And where you have, everything is multidisciplinary at this point. You have cognitive science next to software engineering, next to hardware and all that. And if a team is comfortable in that ambiguity and knowing that they know something, but their colleague, who may be a cognitive expert or a command and control expert, knows a lot too, and that the ego is put aside, that's when the magic happens. Mm-hmm. But there's another piece to it, which I've struggled with it my whole career. I think I finally got better at it by the time I was in my last job, was when you see that somebody you put in a leadership position is just not working. Not because of any reason, their skill set is not aligned to what that team needs. You give them the chance, you give them feedback, but if you have to move them around or treat them with respect, you will. And the team actually appreciates that. Because then folks see that people are treated with fairness, but they also know that we have a pretty high standard. You're going to lead this team, you got to be able to do all this stuff, and and that's the way it is. We don't talk about that enough, but actually I found that was really, really important.
Yeah. So actually, let me add a little bit more to that too, right? So, because I was having a kind of a similar conversation with some folks just the other day about this. There's a yin yang relationship, right? Like I traditionally tended to go more, well, we need more engineers, we need more technical folks, whatever. Well, then it becomes the inmates running the asylum, and no good comes from it, right? You need somebody that's there going, okay, well, we signed up for these milestones, and we had better hit that, and if we don't hit it, what are we backlogging, and what are we sort of pulling off the table, and how are we going to deliver? So there's certainly that balance, right? And finding people's skills, and to let y'all in on a little secret about me, I suck at administrative tasks. I'm terrible at them because it's just not where my focus is, right? So finding those folks, and I was having this conversation with my deputy, who is very good at that sort of stuff, and that's why he and I work so well together. Is he's quite good at that, where I'm off, focusing on the technical side of things, like figuring out that mix of and not having people, frankly, that think exactly like you, but having people that come with a breadth of skills to solve the appropriate problem.
All right. Maybe building on the administrative comment, an important aspect.
That's going to come back to haunt me, isn't it?
An important aspect to all this too is appropriately identifying, doing things within cost envelopes, identifying risk, right? There are constraints. I'd love to talk a little bit about how do you think about getting the highest return on investment with your projects or areas that you oversee? How do you make sure that you're maximizing the mission benefits, but then also appropriately managing the costs and risks therein?
So I would say that everything that we or any job I've ever been in, look to develop, deploy, enable. I've always looked to what can I kill? What can I get rid of? What don't I need to do anymore? So I grew up as a systems engineer, systems guy, server, client, all that type of stuff. As I grew up doing that, it was fun to tinker as a young W1, W2, but I quickly learned, how can I offload this to my higher headquarters and have somebody else do this so I can focus on the harder problem? And so when I could focus on the harder problem that only I or our organization could do at that time, I could figure out how I could get the most return on delivering mail. I don't care where my mail gets delivered from. I care about that I can get to it. And so that's where I looked at, okay, I was able to get rid of 27, 28, whatever the number was, Exchange servers. Let somebody else host it. Don't care. I don't have to do that myself. And so that's how I always looked at return on investment, because I don't always have to do everything. Somebody else can do it that's actually designed to do that for you. I'd
add that there's also an element of hunger to the equation, right? Like, so the teams that I've seen, in my opinion and in my history, perform the best are the ones that maybe aren't fully resourced, are the ones that are running a little leaner, and have to be in the fight in order. Now, I'm not saying completely lean them out and starve them of resourcing, but the ones that run a bit leaner tend to be the ones that are, in my opinion, a little bit more performant than the ones that have an overabundance of resourcing and more resources than they know what to do with, because I think that tends to drive folks down paths and to chase things that and make decisions that maybe they wouldn't have made if they were a little bit more focused or a little bit more lean. So I think that may be a little bit counter, but in my experience, that's where I've seen teams perform the best. They will get the most creative when the coffers are the leanest.
Maybe to add to these comments, another thing that I think everybody needs to remind themselves is that if you want to call them program, project, whatever, endeavor, everyone has risk. Every one of them has risk. Even, whether you think you do or not, you have it. And the whole job of really getting products out is essentially risk management. And you can flip it the other way. I've used this in some of my jobs. Is I sort of can tell the health of a program or an endeavor by questioning the project manager, the program manager, the product developer on tell me your risks and number one, not just what they are, but number two, are you watching them or what are you working to mitigate? What is still ahead of you? What isn't? And if you get answers that don't sound right, there's something not right. And I've seen this on billion-dollar programs that have had none McCurdy's that I've had to work through. Some of you probably figure out what those are, where the program management did not understand where the actual risks were in their program. Yep. And so that's another piece of this. And if you're on a project with a team and people are paying attention to some detail, but you say, well, what does it matter? What is the risk? And don't just say software risk. What part of the software is a risk? I've had that a lot. Well, the software is a risk. What do you mean? Lines of code per week. That's still not there. What is it? Is it your talent? Is it the lack of a software factory? Get them very, very specific. And even a program manager at a 2 or 3 star level or equivalent should know that.
Mark, anything you would add from an industry lens?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the original question was focusing on ROI and how we think about ROI. And coming from my government background, it was all about capabilities, right? It's all about reducing mean time to failure, reducing or increasing range of a capability, reliability metrics, all of those kinds of things. I think coming from the industry side, a lot of my metrics on ROI are more about capabilities developed, number of capabilities, the novel approaches of those capabilities. And more recently, it's a lot about manpower reduction, right? It's about how do we reduce the cognitive load or reduce the individual's needs or the amount of people to run a watch floor or something like that using context-aware or cognitive elements of cyber. So it's very different, and like the answer to many complex questions, it depends.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a common thread I'm hearing in a lot of the responses is, a lot of these projects also deliver and beget a lot of change, a lot of new ways of working. When you have the material and the investments operational, they're often you're organizing around it differently, you're using it differently, and just in our own reflection of work here, I think so much is often missed when I think of the full kind of .mil PFP framework, right? Outside of the M around the material, right? There's what are all the other things that have to be true, that need to be funded, that have to happen, such that you appropriately transition and focus on the right change management pieces for that investment. I think that's such an important part.
I heard one time a very senior person said, "You innovators got to know how to spell .mil PF."
I like that. All right. So we've talked about how do you get after and best organize or equip folks for specific projects. But maybe taking a step back, that we at any given point in time, have an option of which projects we pursue, what priorities we go after, especially as you look at, what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. It's, it's always some degree a cat and mouse game, and when it comes to defense, how do you think about the broader uncertainties around the operational environments that we're going to be playing in, new disruptive, innovative technologies, example, the role AI might play 5 years from now? How do you think about what seeds you plant today and how you scope your projects to best reflect the risks or the opportunities of the future?
So let me jump on this one first. So this is a place where we wrestle with a lot on my team, and a lot of teams like mine, I think, wrestle with similar things. In that, there's constantly new tech. You're going to walk this floor, and you're going to see all kinds of interesting things. No offense to you folks, we're going to see a lot of interesting things, and we're going to play a little bit of buzzword bingo. And, we sort of joked about, the 30 minutes until we mentioned AI. But somebody else mentioned to me before we walked up here about blockchain, right? 3 years ago, we were up here talking about blockchain. Blockchain. It's the answer to every equation. There's the element of, especially when you're focused on the next several years. For us, it's about what tech is going to provide the most value, not chasing tech for the fun of chasing tech. And if you're not careful, there is a little bit of shiny object syndrome that can set in, and then you're never going to deliver anything. So there's striking that balance of trying to stay on top of what's happening, but also I tend to lean more on the practical application of those things, and not on the let's just play with something for the sake of playing something, because when you do, you're going to miss the mark. Also, having that transition partner involved at the very start, so that as you work through a problem set, you have them to ultimately hand off to, and you're working those elements of transition early, because working them late in the problem tends to lead towards, well, not invented here, or you're not hitting the mark, or I don't know why you're doing this. So trying to have them up front. Obviously, AI, big game changer, but there's also the practical. I think we've used in the past the measured application of AI, and not just running around, I'm going to sprinkle a little AI here and a little AI there and a little AI there and hope that something grows. It's what problem am I actually trying to solve, and does this actually add value, or is this just going to waste cycles and divert the team from something that they could be doing better. So I think that's how we approach it, is how can we be practical and actually get capability out the door. That's the reason why we exist, not to play with all the toys in the toy box, but to actually deliver capability at the end of the day.
I think from a lot of my roles, we're doing a lot of tech sensing, and what I mean by that is within the element of industry, we have the privilege of looking across the agencies and kind of identifying the trends of the asks that are occurring, but also to dive deep into the research and have conversations with researchers about kind of the new technology that's evolving, what might be the novel use cases, both offensively, defensively, and what also might not be so obvious, but that may be emerging. We do a lot of research about, you mentioned Ukraine earlier, Bill, and around the problems that are being faced in theater. So it's kind of a summarily generated concept around what does the research say, what is being asked of us, and what we're seeing in theater. And for us, being a private entity, we're focused on that kind of neat intersection, if you will.
Just another comment along these lines. Secretary Gates used to say that when he was Secretary of Defense, the Defense Department had a perfect record on prediction. It was 0 for 8. So you have to. Prediction is and planning is a best practice. You have to do it, but you have to be very, very humble, and think about what does it mean to be adaptable to changes either in technology or the threat. I mean, 5 months ago, who would have in my last job we were helping the Ukrainians fight the North Koreans in Ukrainian, Russian-occupied Ukraine. I don't know what anybody would have predicted that. So but what is constant is number one, the quick adoption of new technology, and ideally by software. And like what is common is degraded operations. They're always going to have either by natural effects or by the adversary challenges in EW, cyber, et cetera, environment, and you just have to assume that and don't assume a compliant adversary. And then you also have to be able to move fast and then really always focus on the kill chain or the equivalent of the kill chain. What is it for our effects against them? What is it to degrade their effects against us? And anything that fits in that and can be moved fast, that'll probably be relevant in the future. But don't fall in love with any predictions because they're going to be wrong.
And that's so Bill's point about the degraded areas is a really interesting point given how we're watching IT evolve over the years. I've been at this a little while, and go back to the days of 3.5-inch discs in the drives and loading your machine up and that sort of thing. But then we watched this centralization of IT and the expectation of always connected and always on. And this is an area of struggle for the department is, okay, IT is moving in that direction, but we will always have a mission set where we will have degraded comms, where, to your point, whether it's weather, whether it's an adversary, what have you. So it's a challenge right now for the department to navigate that, to figure, okay, how do we adopt modern IT approaches, but then at the same time still be able to service those folks who need capability at the edge.
Yeah, and at the edge and the disconnected side of that, it gets down to what decisions are that need to be made at that level, at the echelon, and I'm going to say tip of the spear, because they don't always need everything. They need a certain very small amount of data to make a very specific decision over a 2 to 3 minute time span, and then that data is no longer relevant. So offload what they don't need at a higher echelon and what they do need at the tip of the spear, platoon, squad, whatever that element's going to be, let them be able to make that decision with the data in which they have at their hand.
Yeah, it's circling back to what's the core question that we're trying to answer. What data can help answer that? I think that also extends what I'm hearing is what technologies, right, are available today or might be in the future. They also help that and treat it with a practical way.
And that's where you get the operators, right? And so the only person that can be able to ask that question is the leader that's on the ground at that time, because they have to be able to ask a very specific question to make a decision to either move left or move right.
Yep. So I think you're mentioning the leader on the ground. I think you're hitting an important element of this. I think when it comes to whether it's future technologies or adapting to new ways of working, as we roll out new capabilities, there's an element of upskilling, of training people appropriately to make sure you're truly getting mission success and making the most of those investments. How do you think about the identifying gaps in skill sets or capabilities, and making sure that you're also making those investments alongside with the new acquisitions and technologies that you're delivering?
We're starting to see it now. There's a growing gap between the generation of who we are today as panelists and who's coming into the service today. I can point out a couple of individuals. They don't have a computer. They don't have a desktop. They don't have a laptop. They don't have any of that type of stuff. So anything that we're developing across the board has to be able to be used on their mobile phone. Has to be able to use it at that speed. So there's starting to be a gap that I'm seeing at today's stage with how we communicate. We probably all communicate via email, looking at the group. Our kids don't. I asked my daughter, hey, what's your email? She's like, Dad, I don't use email. Like, well, if you're going to get hired by somebody, you actually have to use that for correspondence and that type of stuff. But she communicates small burst text, Twitter, whatever. You name the social media platform. That's how today's generation communicates. And our up-and-coming leaders communicate in that same vein. And you can see that across the entire plethora of leadership of the U.S. government at this point in time in that aspect. I'll just leave it at that.
We joke a lot about AI and, AI's the answer, what's the question, that kind of thing. But, I saw something recently which kind of blew me away, which, I'd seen everything on AI, but it was, it had to do with a space tech company showing what type of, if you went into their version of ChatGPT, whatever their smart engine is, and say, could you write the equations in Java for this kind of an orbit, and write the software to command and control a satellite. To do that, it came back with the lines of code. I don't know if it's right or not, but okay. Then we said, well, what about those of us who are ancient? Could you do it in Fortran? Came back in Fortran. Now, I'm assuming some of that stuff doesn't work, but when it gets to start working and people are confident in it, that's a different world than all of us grew up in.
Oh, absolutely.
That is a different world.
It definitely is, and there's the force multiplier element specifically of AI around exactly those things, right? Like we have a lot of code that was written by folks who are no longer in the workforce. Heck, in 2000 we were trying to bring them back in order to or 99 in order to modernize code in order to get us over the millennium threshold. There is definitely some goodness there. The area that gives me pause and caution, there was a study released recently by one of the big CSPs about the decline, the over-reliance in GPTs and the decline in that critical thinking that is associated with it. So like the machine tells me this, and so, I must believe it because the machine told me, right? Like, I always use the example, and some of you may have heard me use this publicly before, but I'll use it again because I love it. There was the episode of The Office where Michael and Dwight are driving down the road, and they have the GPS. And the GPS is telling Michael, turn left, turn left, turn left. So he turns left. Well, he turns right into a stream, right? Because he believed the machine, and he didn't use the critical thinking to say, is this right or wrong? So I think that's it's an important point. Like, this should help you, but this shouldn't at the same time replace the knowledge and so it's really finding that balance and not over-reliance on the tech, because what happens when the tech is not there, you still need to perform. So it's one of the things that I personally am trying to get my head around is how much is enough, and we want to make sure that we're not over-reliant. I mean, and I think it goes back to even the makeup of the workforce and how we are structured today and that sort of thing. There's a balance between the contractor workforce and the civilian military workforce that we have to maintain. The civilians and military need to understand the capabilities that they have. So when you all as vendors or contractors bring us stuff, we can actually have a viable conversation that goes back and forth. We can't, to be blunt, outsource some of that critical thinking. We need to be able to do that internally in order to drive capability and ultimately integrate capability.
Yeah, so as an example of over-reliance on that, very specific, so I'll say just recently, there was a proposal that was presented back to the government of system architecture. Hey, build a system architecture, and so they threw it in a GPT, and it spit out that. Didn't modify it, left it exactly the way it was. I want a network system I want a network architecture and a systems architecture. And they submitted two, and they were identical. Luckily, the government side saw that, like, this is kind of odd. So they took the exact same question, put it in, and spit it out exactly. Thank you very much, integrator. Go back and do your homework. And now I really want the detailed one. So that was a very, very fun conversation at a KO level.
We've seen it on my team too, where we've asked somebody to go and research something, and they just ask a GPT, and they come back with an answer that is completely out of line with out of context with what we were asking.
And so that's where it gets to the critical thinking aspect of it. You'll never be able to replace that very specific item of critical thinking by the human individual.
Yep. All right. Well, I think we are at the end of our time this morning. I want to extend a special thanks to all of our panelists for, I think, a great discussion this morning. Thank you all for joining us. Would love to reflect on just a few kind of key points and kind of takeaways that I think we heard this morning. I think one is around, so much of this revolves around the talent, getting the right people, empowering them. It's making sure that they're accountable for the right outcomes. Two, it's around defining the right problem and focusing the data, the technology, everything against that problem and what's needed for mission success. I think three, the importance of those feedback loops with the operational community and making sure that you have, your tech isn't, landing on the bottom of the Dnipro in Ukraine. Four, I think, is a cognizant of risk, right? Especially risks and how future technology is used, and as we kind of structure our programs and acquisitions. And then I think last is it's always going to be a portfolio play when it comes to technology. There's Mark, to use your words, is a sense of the technology that's out there, but then Steve, to use your words, the practicality of this is what we need in the near term and where tech is going to get us to make sure you're doing that right balance to get after the right capabilities. So again, thank you everyone for joining us this morning, and again to our panelists, appreciate your time.